Hey guys, it's Derp here again with another build guide. I was asked to make a group healer build, and that's what I run a lot of in wars. I usually do group healer, bruiser, IGVG, or point tank, one of the four basically mandatory, like necessary roles in war. I fill all four as needed. But lately I've been spending a lot of time in group healer. And there's three ways to really do an effective group healer. There's what I'll start out with is what I use for if I'm a secondary healer on a point tank team. I will run one of two specs. I will do Splash, Divine, and Sacred Ground, or I will do Sacred and then I'll run Light's Embrace and Divine and do double single target. Um, that's if I'm paired with an AoE healer. And the reason you want to do this is because you don't want to overlap their beacon. There is a third way to do this. You could do hybrid healing, which is hybrid AoE and hybrid group. So, meaning you would take either orb or beacon as a hybrid healer. But if you're pairing with an AoE healer for a point tank situation, like if you're on a deady point team, you might want to do either the double single target. This is the hardest, in my opinion, this is the hardest class. And the double single target is the hardest thing to do in the game. And that would look something like this. So basically, the idea is to get as much out of your intensify as possible. Get your intensify stacks up as you want your bending light. So when you after you dodge, you get 20% more healing, and this just gives you 20% more healing out the gate. Those are pretty huge. You need Sacred Protection because it just increases your entire team's healing by 5%. So that's a must-have on all heal builds. When you heal an ally below 50% life stack cooldowns are reduced by 10%. This is huge, and it pairs really well with Refreshing Divine Embrace, which I have the Glowing Life Crystal staff, which in my opinion is best in slot for any group healing. So if you're paired with a AoE healer and you are really good at managing your cooldowns and you're getting a lot of your light attacks off to get the refresh, you're really good at keeping your intensify stacks up, and you're really good at surviving on point or around point, the double single target is super, super good. And what you want to do is you kind of want to double single target one person. You're effectively acting as like a pocket healer. So whoever the tankiest person on your team is, or whoever the lead bruiser is, like your group lead, you're going to want to keep them alive forever on point. And double single target is one of the best ways to do this, because you're focusing all of your heals onto that person, and your Sacred Ground is going to be on them always. Your Divine is going to be up on them always. Your Light's Embrace is going to be on them always. They're going to have stamina, and you're basically going to keep them alive forever. This is really, really hard to do, though. I can't stress that enough. Really good pocket healers with double single targets are probably the hardest things to come by in as far as for wars. If you get really good with this build and you get into a 5-man group, especially a point group, like everybody's going to want you on their team. So if you're looking to get into a war, and you get really good with double single target, and you go to any competitive PvP company, and you're like, hey, I can, you know, I guarantee you I could get over a million healing with double single target. Realistically, you should be at least above 700,000 to 800,000 healing with this. But if you could break a mill as a double pocket healer or double single target, whatever you want to call it, this heal build is insane, and you will keep one person alive basically indefinitely. Especially if you have refreshing Divine Embrace on your life staff. But yeah, you need. I'll just kind of go through the rest of it. So Protector's Touch is nice because it gives you fortify on your any attacks, so lights or heavies. Um, Intensify gets up to 30% increased healing. You need this Divine Blessing when you heal an ally below 50%. They are healed for 30% more. This is kind of standard on all heal builds. You want to go all the way down Divine Embrace, because if the ally healed by Shared Struggle is below 50% health, heal another ally within 8 meters of that ally. Shared Struggle, if you target is below 50% health, heal one additional ally within 8 meters for the same amount. So it can bounce, right? So you can actually effectively heal your entire team if they're all on point with just one Divine Embrace. So if they're all super low and you just target the lowest person, it'll just bounce between everybody. Divine Embrace costs 20% or 20 less mana. That's just big, because that makes it only cost 5 mana. So it doesn't cost like anything to cast. Divine Embrace, create a 0.5 meter radius area around an ally or a location on the ground that heals the target within for 120% weapon damage. It's just a massive, massive heal. And the fact that it spreads to allies is huge. And the cooldown is only 4.8 seconds. But if you have Glowing Life Crystal Staff, Refreshing Divine Embrace, if you target an ally below 50% health, the cooldown is reduced by 70%, and you gain 5.8% of your mana back, which is going to be more than the spell cost. So if you get really good with this and you target people at like 40% health, you'll usually catch them before they die. You'll get an increased return on your mana investment, and you basically get the ability back immediately. If you have any kind of refreshing or refreshing evasion, I prefer refreshing over refreshing evasion, because refreshing evasion requires you to dodge, and stamina management is huge now, especially with the ultimates in play. So I think refreshing is the best way to go. But if you Divine Embrace, even just with the stuff on this weapon, with the refreshing move, the blessed, and the Divine Embrace, if you Divine Embrace, light attack, Divine Embrace, it'll be back up by the time you do your second if you're healing somebody under 50% health. I've gotten 6 back-to-back Divine Embraces, and kept somebody up with 10 people on them, all smacking them just by repeatedly spamming Divine Embrace, and they don't die. If they're sitting in your Sacred and you're just spamming Divine Embrace on that person, they're not going to die, almost no matter what they do, what anyone does, unless they get targeted by like 3 explosions and melt through your entire healing. So it's just, this double pocket healing build is insane. So that's the build for healing. You want to get Sacred Ground just because it's a mega heal in a 3 meter radius. It heals for 16% of weapon damage every second. It regenerates stamina and mana 50% faster while in a Sacred Ground. It also gives Fortify if you have the perk, and then while allies are in a Sacred Ground, they are healed for 50% more from all healing. So if they're standing in your Sacred and your Divine Embrace and Light Embrace on them constantly, they're never going to die. Desperate Speed, when you heal an ally below 50% health, Life Staff ability cooldowns are reduced by 10%. It can only be triggered once every 5 seconds. That's still really good. Revitalize, when you hit with a light attack, reduce Life Staff cooldowns by 5%. That's basically mandatory. Blissful Touch, light attacks now heal for 16% of weapon damage when passing through an ally. That's huge. Mending Touch is really good, especially paired with Protector's Touch and Intensify. It all synergizes really well. But personally, I would rather have 20% more outgoing healing from having Protector's Strength than having Mending Touch, because that's what you'd have to give up. It just makes more sense. And then Absolved, Life Staff basic attacks no longer consume mana. So that's the Life Staff build for double pocket. I run Rapier when I'm group healing. I've been toying around with Sword and Shield and Hatchet. Sword and Shield is actually really good as well, but you can't do the medium chest piece. And the reason why I like the Sword and Shield is because when you're running away, you could get like thrust protection or slash protection on your shield, or ward, some kind of ward on your shield, and you can block muskets. So if you find a nice little pocket of safety in the war, and the kill teams aren't harassing you too much, but you're still getting pestered by muskets, the second you put up a shield, they're going to go to another target. So I actually kind of like Sword and Shield. I'm trying to make it work out. The survivability isn't as good as a rapier. Hatchet is almost the same as a rapier, but it's also not quite there. And the reason is pretty simple. Flesh goes through targets, enemy or friends. It doesn't matter. You go straight through. I go all the way down the grace tree. I don't take controlled breathing. I take on guard instead, just because. It doesn't really matter. You can take on, just because when I put my rapier on for my DPS builds, then I don't have to switch it. But you can do controlled breathing, but you're not going to be attacking people with this anyway. The extra stamina is nice. You could also drop this for this, but it doesn't really matter. All you really care about is having the abilities. You could have this whole tree empty and just take these 3 abilities, and it would still be worth it. So there's the rapier tree. I'm not really going to go into it too much, because it doesn't really matter. All you really need is the evade, the flash, and the riposte. Let me get back into the second life staff build, which is also good for point tanks. And this is also what I take when I'm group healing for point teams, or when, so if you have a secondary healer, if you're on a point team, you want to take this. If you're on a kill team, I would take this. So this works for point team as secondary healer, because you can heal through fort. You can heal from a distance. So right when you respawn, say you get killed by a kill team, right when you respawn, if you're fighting on B, you could heal from the fort before you get back in. If you still have teammates up on point, so it's just pretty good to have. The splash of light. So the splash of light goes 100-meter distance, 60% weapon damage. For each ally healed that is below 50% health, you gain 5% of your mana back. Splash of light removes 1 debuff when it heals an ally. And then if you have the perk, the ability perk with it, the mending or purity of light, allies with a debuff remove with splash of light are healed for 48% of your weapon damage, which is going to be always. And then, so that would be divine, sacred, splash. If you're on a point team, you go with protector's touch. If you're not on a point team, you go with mending touch. So this also works really well for kill teams. So for kill teams, you want single target heal, because you want to be able to keep one person alive pretty much indefinitely. And then if you have a bow on your team, you're going to be going splash of light if you have a bow or a musket, because they might be 50, 80 meters off, targeting healers, and they're not going to be with your group as much. But you'll still be able to heal them with splash of light and get them out of some tricky situations. So this is the group healing build I do for that, for kill team or point team. Because the way we do it is we run a pure AoE healer with Sacred Ground, Orb, and Beacon. So all the AoE heals. And you don't want to overlap their healing, right? You don't want to have 2 beacons overlapping each other. Now, we could get into the third build. So everything else pretty much stays the same. And this is a build that for every group outside of point team or kill team, I recommend the hybrid healer. And the hybrid healer is divine, sacred. So all this stuff stays the same, right? You're always going to have that set up over here, and you're always going to be taking this. So, but the hybrid healer takes either orb of protection or beacon. Beacon is really good for pad healing, because it does a decent amount of healing, 146% of weapon damage, To enemies attached to its target, it attaches to its target and heals allies within a 3-meter radius for 16% weapon damage each second for 10 seconds. So it's similar to a Sacred Ground, except it's mobile, right? Sacred Ground also increases the healing that they take by 50%, which is it works on itself as well. So Sacred's always going to do more. But this is like having a mini Sacred, or basically a mini mobile Sacred, right? So Beacon is really good. The issue with Beacon, and the reason why I take Orb of Protection, is the healing is less. It only heals for 8% of weapon damage, so it's half of the Beacon. But it also adds recovery. So Orb of Protection hits an ally, they gain recovery and are healed for 6% weapon damage every second for 10 seconds. So now that bumps it up to a 14% heal, which is almost the same as Beacon. And if you successfully heal an ally with Orb of Protection, you also gain Fortify and Recovery. And when this projectile hits, it affects all allies within 3 meters. So it gives a 10% Fortify for 20 seconds, which is a big Fortify. It heals 8% or 14% of weapon damage. The damage dealt to enemies, who cares? And it heals you and gives you Fortify. So you also gain the Fortify and Recover. And it does this to everybody in a 3-meter radius. And the reason why I like it is because it's an 8.1 second cooldown. It's an instant cast, and it doesn't overlap with anything else, right? So Beacon has such a wide area. So if you just look at Orb, so I'll lock this in. If you look at Orb, the area is pretty big, right? It's about the same as a Sacred, or it is the same as a Sacred. So the area that if I cast that right in the middle, it's the same, it overlaps it. It's a pretty big area. So if you cast Sacred and then cast your Beacon right into the middle, everybody in that little circle is going to have a bunch of fortification. They're going to get healed by because your Mending Protection is going to actually increase the healing from your Sacred Ground, and your Sacred Ground is going to increase the healing from your Beacon. So they stack off of each other. So because of Recovery and Sacred Ground, it synergizes super well. Now, the reason why I don't like to take Beacon, but this is a personal preference, and I recommend the hybrid healers in the army when I run it take Orb, is because Beacon, I never take Speed of Light. I don't care about haste in a war. I take Protector Strength for sure. So the reason why I don't take the haste is because who cares? But you need to take Radiance Blessing because it makes it last 5 seconds longer. So that is an extra third. So you're increasing the healing output by a lot. Infused Light, Beacon's area of effect radius is increased to 4.5 meters, so that's a pretty big AoE. It's almost as big as Oblivion, and it's a moving heal. So Beacon is just really good, but I don't take it on my hybrid healer because it overlaps with the AoE healer's beacons. And since it has such a big radius, what you'll find is you'll get more coverage out of the beacons if they're overlapping, but that kind of creates like a zone in the middle where if you're a hybrid healer running the way I run it, so I run 151 con and then 354 focus. Now, if you're an AoE healer running 50 con and then the rest focus, if you're overlapping a 50 con AoE healer with 400 focus, you're actually going to be doing less healing than theirs. And that area in the middle, so if there's 2 circles, right? So say this is one beacon, and then there's that. This area right in between the two, where if there's 2 beacons overlapping, is going to go to whoever cast last. So the second person to cast it would be the one who's actually doing the healing in there. So if you're overriding somebody else's beacon who's an AoE healer, you're going to be getting rid of their damage or their healing effectively, and you're going to be overlapping it with a smaller heal. Now, guaranteeing that everybody's getting healed is good, but another reason why I don't like it is look how long that cooldown is. It's a 25% or a 25-second cooldown. Now that goes down with refreshing evasion. That goes down with refreshing move. It goes down a lot. But having a base cooldown of 25 seconds, or 28.2 seconds actually, um, compared to 8.1, you could get 3 orbs off in the time that you could get 1 beacon off, and this has a possibility of overriding a more powerful healer's ability, right? So, and it doesn't have the fortify that Orb of Protection does. So if you're doing hybrid healing, my recommendation is to do it exactly like this. So you could skip the bend light and take Protector Strength, or you could give up this for this, because it's going to be more effective. This gets you up to 30, but this is going to be every time you dodge. You can do that way. I do this just because I'm pretty good about having my Intensify stacks up, and I'll take the 30% over the 20%, and I don't want to blow my stamina just to do bigger heals, right? I'd rather, this is just too good because you're always going to have a buff on you. Whether it be food or fortify or whatever, you're just always going to have a buff up. But yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it for weapon. For the armor, the only perks you really need, if you're running Splash of Light, you're going to want the Refreshing Divine Embrace. If not Splash of Light, if you're running Divine Embrace, which you should be as a group healer, you're going to want Glowing Life Crystal Staff. You can find it in Mutated Dynasty. So next time Dynasty goes mutated on your server, go out and farm up a Glowing Life Crystal Staff, bump it up to 625. You never need to get another life staff. Hey guys, I'm going to pause it real quick right here. I forgot to go over what gems you need for your armor and your weapons. So you're going to want the diamond in your life staff, and if you run a Void Gauntlet, you're going to want diamond in that as well, with no rune glass at all. And just go ahead and slap a tier 5 diamond in those. And then for your armor, I prefer to run physical damage or physical resistance in my armor, and then full energizing rune glass so that you always have stamina. There's really no other glass that really makes sense other than energizing. I don't think the nature damage gems do anything for your healing, and who cares how much damage you're putting out? That's not your job. Now, if you're running a melee weapon as a secondary, so rapier, sword and shield, or hatchet, I would run the amber gems with the nature damage over time rune glass, because then at least you can do a little bit of damage, and if you get caught out one-on-one in like an OPR or something, you can go fight them and you'll still be able to do some damage to them and probably kill them. But yeah, that's about it. Let's get back to the build. If you're running Splash of Light, you're going to want Purity of Light. It's huge. And then you're going to want Fortify Sacred Ground. I just use Sagacious Hat. It's free. It has Refreshing and Elemental Aversion and Fortified Sacred Ground. It's not the best. I would rather have Resilient, Refreshing, Fortified Sacred Ground, but I also don't want to spend $200,000. I am using regular pants right now, but another option would be Sagacious Pants. If you're running Hybrid Healer with the Orb of Protection, they have Mending Protection on them. So having pants with Mending Protection on them is huge, because Mending Protection at 600 does, I think it's 25, increases healing power by 25% for 3 seconds if Orb of Protection heals an ally with less than 50%. So that's massive, because that's all outgoing healing. Just, you're getting a free increase of 25% for 3 seconds if you hit them with under 50% health. So, and if you're just shooting this off into clumps, chances are you're going to hit somebody that has 50% health. And that's what's kind of cool about Orb of Protection, is that the mana cost is so low, the cooldown is so low, and you're just always going to have it up. So you can kind of act as like a hybrid AoE healer just by launching your heals into clumps, right? And you're going to be helping not just your group, but everybody around your group as well. You should be putting priority on your group, but say your group goes down, you're still going to be very effective outside of your group. And then what I end up doing is, so if I have a group, like I could go into OPR and kind of test this out, but if I have a group, what I'll do is if they start going down and I'm the last person up, what I'll do is I'll just hit F1 and I'll go out of group mode, and that'll allow me to target whoever, right? So if I'm not in group mode, I could place this on whoever outside of my group, and then say, you know, these guys are my group. When I see them come back or they spawn, and they get like they meet back up with me, I could just hit F1 and then go back into group healing. But yeah, and then I could, if they're fine or they're moving, and then we see a clump over here, I could just toss my mending protection into them, right? If they need healing. So it's hybrid healer is probably going to be the most played healer class in the game, in wars. So like this is probably the route I would take with Orb of Protection, just because the extra fortify, the low cooldown, and the decent amount of healing that beacon gives, or orb gives, and the fact that it's not going to overlap the AoE healers, at least as much. You're not going to be replacing a pretty big heal with a subpar heal. It's just all around, in my opinion, better. But some people do like to run beacon. It's kind of up to you. If you like big numbers, then beacon is going to be your way to go. With this setup here, you should be able to get to about 1.2 million healing. With the splash and divine embrace, you should be looking at anywhere from like 7 to 9. You can do a million plus if the war's decent. And everybody, if it's rather even, you can do a million plus pretty easily with splash and divine. Double pocket is going to be the lowest amount of healing, but it's also going to be the most effective healing. Now you can get anywhere from like 700 to a million with that as well. I very rarely see dedicated point healers that are double pocket healing. I very rarely see them break a million, but it's possible. And those are like the best pocket healers in the game. But that's just to kind of be telling you what the numbers you should be looking for, because, you know, in wars, usually I don't like to go by the scoreboard, but for healers, unless they're just straight stat padding and not sticking with their group and just following clumps around and focusing on the clump and just padding their numbers, if they're not doing their job and they're just focusing on numbers, you could get higher than that. But the people who are actually playing correctly and sticking with their groups are going to be able to get, you know, 1.2 million or more if you're really, really good with a hybrid healer. You know, around 8 to 900,000 with a splash healer. And then the double pocket is going to be realistically around the 700,000 to 900,000 range. You could do a million plus if you're super good, or if your team's just taking a shit ton of damage, but you're keeping them alive for a long time. The cheapest healer food is the bear. What is it? The slow roasted bear flank with root vegetables. That's what I use. Another thing you want to make sure that you have is you need Sacred on your ring. It's a must-have. Hardy, Sacred, and Health would be my pickup, just because that extra stamina is great. Misty Kismet ring is a really good earring that you could pick up. Purifying Toast is great now that the cooldown on the cleanse pots is higher. Refreshing Evasion and Refreshing on the same ring is huge, especially for AoE healers. Misty Kismet's better. Are probably the best. Shard of Lithomancy is really good as well for group healer. Duplicating Toast, Refreshing Toast, and Refreshing is super good for especially point tank, like if you're on a dedicated point team, just because you're going to have your pots up faster and you're going to not burn through as many, especially cleanse pots. And then I do Fortified Recovery, Fortified, and Health. That way I don't die as much. I play on point groups a lot. So having Fortified Recovery is huge, because if I get under 50%, 10% Fortify is going to keep me alive. It's a 90% cooldown, so it's not that great. I would probably replace this with something else, but for now it's working out. Fortified is really great because I'm applying a lot of Fortify, and having it last 30% longer is huge. Um, with the amount of Oblivions on the field nowadays, now that some people are switching to Ice Gauntlet or Void Gauntlet Blunderbuss instead of Ice Gauntlet Blunderbuss. Fortified isn't as valuable because the fortifications are just being stripped so quickly that extending the length isn't really important. But it works out for now. It was pretty cheap, so I got it, and it's been working until pretty recently. I'm probably gonna end up switching it out, but you don't need Keen Beacon at all. An extra 6% crit rate is garbage. If you're running Void Gauntlet, so let me see if I have a Void Gauntlet I can equip. As your secondary, that's a completely different build. For that, I run Scream, Orb, Scream, Orb, and Essence Rupture. And then I take everything here, and I take this, because it pairs with Efficient Harvest. So you could harvest to get your cooldowns back up. And this will make it so cooldowns are reduced by 10% while performing Harvest Rupture, and then this will Harvest Essence, drain health, reduced by 50% while you're below 25% mana. So not only are you getting your mana back, it's barely doing any health damage to you, and you're getting your cooldowns back up. And the reason why I take Essence Rupture is because it heals anyone that hits that person. So it's basically a 20% of your life staff damage, life steal to anybody that's hitting that person. So you fire this into a clump. Anybody who hits that person is going to get a pretty significant amount of healing done. It also makes them receive 15 stamina when they hit them, and friendlies within 4 meters of the affected target are healed for 80% of your weapon damage when the Essence Rupture ends. If they die, or if it just runs out of time, so still 10 seconds, so at that end of that 10 seconds, it does a pretty big heal in a 4-meter radius, which is a big radius, so 80% heal, and it also counts if they die. And then Orb is a long-range, basically burst heal, so fires an unblockable orb that passes through enemies, dealing 90% weapon damage, and inflicts Disintegrate, dealing 5% weapon damage per second, and reducing damage absorption by 5% for 8 seconds. Stacks up to 3 times. So if you let it go through and then come back, you're going to be putting rend on everybody that it goes through, all the enemies. And then at max range, it transforms into a healing orb and returns healing friendlies for 20% weapon damage per second for 5 seconds. And then you get 5 mana back per enemy hit by the orb. The orb slows enemies already affected by any debuff, reducing their movement speed by 30% for 3 seconds. That's a huge slow. And then detonating orb, press the ability input again to detonate the orb with a 4-meter radius. Depending on the orb's phase, the explosion will either damage enemies for 70% of weapon damage, or apply a stack of Disintegrate, or heal friendlies for 70% of weapon damage. So that's a pretty decent heal with a 4-meter radius. And it does a heal over time when it comes back as well. So what you do is you let the orb go out, disintegrate everybody, and then when it's coming back, you let it kind of pass right through the clump, and then hit it right at the tail end of where the clump is, and it's going to be a fat heal. And then you keep Scream just for escape. What I do is, for my weapon, you want Blessed and Nullifying, or Blessed and the perk for Orb, Diminishing Orb. So Diminishing Orb is super good if it's on your, so let me do with, oh yeah, that's focus right there. Diminishing Orb, keenly empowered, doesn't really matter. So I'd want Blessed as well. Now these can be expensive. So 18k. Focus and Intelligence, you want one with pure focus. So, but you also don't really need the third perk. So if you can find one for cheaper. But if you get one with pure focus, Diminishing Orb, on hit, Orb of Decay reduces duration of target's non-consumable buffs by 68%. So it's almost like nullifying Oblivion, except it takes like 2 or 3 seconds to get rid of the buffs. right? And that's for everybody you hit. So having that plus blessed on your weapon is super good. You still might want to take putrefying scream, but I save scream for when I'm being attacked, so it doesn't really matter as much. And you don't want to overlap a better person's scream. So if they're already diseased by a scream, you don't want to override their disease because the IG VGs and VG blunderbuss are going to have plague scream on their void gauntlet. So diminishing orb is probably going to be the play. I also don't think that having putrefying scream on the void gauntlet is absolutely necessary anymore. I think having it on the armor is just fine with the amount of plague that is on the map because of blunderbuss, more hatchets, and the great sword now being a thing. There's just so many sources of disease now that I don't think having plague scream on your weapon is a big issue, but that's for another video. If you run your secondary as a void gauntlet, this is pretty much exactly what I would go for, except for pure focus. You want diminishing orb, you want blessed, and you're gonna want to run orb, essence rupture, and then basically go all the way down this tree because you want void caller. And the reason why you want void caller is because of on a successful ability hit, gain a stack of void essence. At 6 stacks, consumes all stacks and gain a 3-meter aura that heals self and friendlies for 30% of weapon damage and deals 30% weapon damage per second to enemies. It has a 5-second duration. That scales exclusively with focus. Scream is what it is. You gain Fortify for each enemy hit, increasing damage absorption by 10% for 10 seconds per hit. So that's up to a 30% Fortify. Root is 1 second extra to targets below 50% health. So this is basically just a root. It staggers and roots enemy for 5 meters in front of you, disables enemy's movement for 2 seconds. This also gives you a bunch of cooldown. So this 10% damage, who cares? You're healing. 10% critical chance while abilities are on cooldown, who cares? But 5% cooldown reduction on all ability critical hits, that's huge. Gain in power when casting an ability within 5 meters of an enemy, who cares? Efficient harvest is actually super good if you know how to use it, and it pairs with refreshing harvest. Leeching agony on critical hit, heal equal to 15% of your damage done. It's not going to be much, but you're going to hit crit every now and then. And then refreshing for frailty, 5% cooldown reduction on all abilities when successfully hitting enemies afflicted by 3 or more debuff stacks. So that's a lot. So you're going to get your cooldowns back up, but you're never really going to be sitting here light attacking. But it's going to synergize pretty well. And there's just not much worth taking here. And the keystone kind of sucks. So gain a stack of void essence per successful ability hit. At 4 or more stacks, your next successful ranged attack will instantly reset all void gauntlet cooldowns and remove all stacks. That's good, but you're not going to be sitting there heavy attacking enough for this to be effective. You're just going to want to do this. Dodging, this one's pretty cool. Mending evasion's okay. But nothing else is really worth it, except for maybe the 5% mana on light attacks. But again, you're not going to be sitting there light attacking. You're going to be switching in and out of Void Gauntlet all the time. The only time you're really going to bring it out is to get your cooldowns back and to get mana back. And then to use your abilities. But yeah, that's about it. Word of advice, I stick to Rapier for the most part when I'm doing group healing. Just because if you're not alive, your group's not alive. And if you're a hybrid healer, you're probably the only healer in that group. So I do Rapier. I leave the Void Gauntlet healing to AoE healers. Their job is to crank out as much healing as possible and have a widest spread of healing. So them taking the Void Gauntlet is just makes a lot more sense. Their job is to get big numbers and make sure that wide areas of people are always healed. Your job is to keep your team alive. That's your only focus. So if you're really good at survival without the Rapier, pick up the Void Gauntlet, but 9 times out of 10, I say stick with Rapier, or even try out Sword and Shield or Hatchet, but Rapier is the go-to. Sweet. You guys have a wonderful day. night, whatever it is. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Hopefully you like the build. Keep up the good work. Get into some wars. Later.